Welcome back to our search from opinion to insight. Imagine a world where a terrible illness could just wipe out a third of everyone. Or maybe where your entire life revolved around making things by hand.
Yeah, or where just one single invention could completely reshape society almost overnight.
Exactly. We're tackling the massive shifts in socioeconomic life across history. Specifically, we're looking at two really pivotal moments: the rise of medieval cities and, well, the seismic changes of the Industrial Revolution.
Exactly. And our mission for you is to really get under the skin of how people lived, how they worked, and how they organized their societies during these transformative eras. We'll pull out the key innovations, certainly the tough challenges, and the lasting impacts that continue to shape our world, especially around those ever-present concepts of inequality and progress. We've got a fantastic stack of historical texts and analyses to guide us, making sure we uncover all the important perspectives for you.
Okay, let's jump right into it then. Our sources, they start by painting a picture of Europe right after the fall of the West Roman Empire, 476 AD. What did daily life, the economy, what did that look like in those early medieval centuries?
Well, for a significant period after 476, life in Europe largely reverted to a very localized agrarian kind of existence. People lived within what historians often call a domain economy. So you should imagine largely self-sufficient agricultural estates, usually centered around a lord's manor, with most people just working the land. Production was primarily for survival, feeding your own family or providing for the lord. There was some craft and trade, but really minimal compared to the self-sufficiency you saw in the countryside. But then around the 10th century, things start to change. What was the spark?
Well, it really came down to some key agricultural innovations. Two main things stand out.
First, the three-field system. Basically dividing farmland into three parts, using them alternately, much better for the soil, prevented depletion.
Ah, clever. And the second?
The iron plow, heavier, stronger. It meant they could cultivate denser, heavier ground, which opened up new land, dramatically increased efficiency.
So better farming, more food. What happens next?
You get a significant increase in food production.
Oh, man.
And that leads to, well, a remarkable birth surplus. More people than the land could really sustain with traditional farming alone. So where did these extra people go? Well, they began to migrate, forming new settlements. These often popped up near existing castles. Castles offered protection, right? Or maybe at important crossroads, which naturally became trading points. These places rapidly grew into what we now recognize as medieval cities. For instance, the city of Lear, it received its own city rights in 1212. These weren't just symbolic, they were actual charters granting the inhabitants the power of self-governance, their own legal jurisdiction, making them largely independent from a feudal lord.
Wow, that's a huge break from the old system.
Oh, absolutely, a monumental break from that old rural domain economy. In these burgeoning cities, you primarily found the laborators, the craftspeople, bakers, smiths, fullers. They processed wool and dyers, all artisans, making goods by hand. But what's truly insightful here is how they organized into what were known as craft guilds, and these guilds are far more than just professional associations. They regulated pretty much everything. Who practiced a certain trade, how products were made, ensuring quality standards, and even setting prices. Crucially, they also served as early forms of social welfare, providing mutual aid to members in times of sickness or disability, or even death.
Whole support system built in.
Very much so. If you wanted to learn a trade, you'd start as an apprentice, learning directly from a master. After years, you'd become a journeyman, able to work for pay. And eventually, after completing a master test, a kind of masterpiece to demonstrate your skill, you could become a maester yourself, and open your own workshop. It was a rigorous system, ensuring both quality and a pathway to expertise.
And you mentioned a fantastic example of this intricate system was the flourishing woolen cloth industry in Flemish cities like Ypres and Ghent. That wasn't just about making clothes, was it? It sounds like a massive economic engine.
Absolutely. Woolen cloth, or laken as it was called, was a highly complex product, and its production really highlights the specialized nature of city labor back then. It involved a whole chain of different crafts. First, raw wool was spun into yarn, then woven into fabric. After weaving, you had the fullers, who would clean and thicken the cloth, a really vital step to make it sturdy. Then dyers would add those vibrant colors that made Flemish cloth so famous. The final product would be inspected in the Laken Hall, the cloth hall often these massive, impressive buildings.
Right, I've seen pictures. They weren't just warehouses.
No, not at all. They serve for quality control, but also as storage and a central marketplace. This entire process, it really speaks volumes about the early organization of industrial-like production, long before factories as we know them existed. Now, power in these early cities. Initially, it was held by the wealthy merchants, the patriciers. They were typically among the first citizens, the porters, to gain those official city rights we talked about. And they largely dominated the city councils, making laws and administering justice. And you also had the bolju, sometimes called a mayor or shout, who was the representative of the lord or ruler, sort of overseeing the city government from the top down.
But that wasn't the end of the story, was it?
No, definitely not. What's fascinating is the emergence of significant social struggle later on. The craftspeople, organized through their powerful guilds, began to demand a greater say in how the city was run. Ultimately, the guilds did successfully gain political rights. It reflects a real shift in power, moving away from purely economic elites towards the organized workforce.
An early form of collective action demanding representation.
You could certainly see it that way, yes. And if we zoom out a bit to the broader societal structure, it was fundamentally what's called an estate society. This meant society was divided into distinct hierarchical groups, each with different roles and rights. At the top were the orators, the clergy, whose role was to pray and provide spiritual guidance. Below them were the bellators, the nobility and knights who fought and provided protection. And then the vast majority, the labrators, farmers, traders, craftspeople, those who, well, worked to sustain everyone else. There's a famous description by Adalbero of Leon, who saw society as one body, where these tasks complemented each other, each estate supporting the success of the others.
Which sounds nice, but also kind of locks everyone into place.
Exactly. That metaphor was incredibly powerful because it reinforced the idea of a natural, almost divinely ordained social order. It made inequality seem like a necessary, even a good part of the whole system. And within this very patriarchal society, men held almost all the formal power. Now, women were absolutely vital to daily life, and they often participated in crafts, but their legal and political rights were severely limited. They typically couldn't hold official positions or participate directly in governance.
It's incredible to consider how these societies organize themselves, the complexity of it all. But despite all this growth and innovation, city life also had its, well, immense challenges and dark sides.
Oh, absolutely. City life, for all its promise, came with stark realities. There were the ever-present risks of fire. Think of all those wooden buildings packed together. Widespread poverty was a constant issue. And perhaps most terrifyingly, disease. The 14th century saw Europe absolutely ravaged by the Black Death, a devastating form of the plague.
And this wasn't just a local outbreak.
No, not at all. This was a pandemic. It swept across continents and tragically wiped out an estimated perhaps a third of Europe's entire population in just a few years. The scale is hard to even imagine. The fear was immense, partly because people simply didn't understand what was causing it. We hear about pest doctors, plague doctors trying to protect themselves with those iconic bird beak masks filled with herbs. They believed they could filter out bad air or miasma. This period also very tragically saw a rise in conspiracy theories. Horrific persecutions and massacres of Jewish communities occurred, as they were wrongly accused of poisoning wells and causing the plague.
Just awful. Were there any attempts at sort of public health measures?
There were early attempts, yes. Things like quarantine, where ships and travelers from affected areas had to wait 40 days before entering a city, and systems for draining excess water to improve sanitation. But their effectiveness was, frankly, limited against such a virulent disease.
And the economic fallout.
Profound. With so many people dying, there was a severe labor shortage. This actually meant that survivors, the common laborers, could demand higher wages. This created social tensions in the short term, definitely, but over the longer term, it did lead to some improvements in working conditions and bargaining power for workers.
Interesting. And what role did climate play in all this? You mentioned the agricultural boom earlier. Did climate affect the decline too?
Climate had a significant, often overlooked, impact. The period of growth coincided with what climatologists call the medieval warm period, roughly 950 to 1250. This generally meant more favorable conditions for agriculture, supporting that population growth and the rise of cities. However, starting around the 14th century, Europe entered what's known as the Little Ice Age. This colder, more volatile period led to more frequent crop failures, widespread hunger, which undoubtedly made populations more vulnerable.
Making the impact of the plague even worse.
Exactly. It exacerbated the impact of the plague and other societal challenges, hitting an already stressed population. So, thinking about help for the needy back then, before widespread cities, say pre-12th century, how did people get by if they fell on hard times?
It was very informal, relied on family, neighbors, friends, maybe some charity from monasteries distributing food.
But as cities grew, so did poverty, right? Low wages, high prices.
Exactly. Urbanization concentrated poverty. The old informal ways weren't enough. So new providers stepped in. The clergy played a role, wealthy individuals making donations, the craft guilds we talked about.
The guild safety net again.
Yes, and even some early city services started offering aid. But it was almost all funded by donations.
And who actually got the help? Poor tables.
Right. Run by wealthy volunteers, distributing bread, maybe shoes, later money or tokens. But, and this is key, they often prioritized who they thought was deserving. Relatives of donors, maybe impoverished citizens with connections, and definitely not foreigners, which could just mean someone from the next town over. Aid was seen as a favor, a privilege, absolutely not a right.
A very different mindset. What about hospitals?
They started appearing around the 12th, 13th centuries for poor travelers, pilgrims, food, shelter for a few days, but they evolved.
Yeah, later they started admitting sick and wounded townspeople, staffed mostly by clergy, nuns, and monks with practical skills rather than formal medical training.
And the care itself.
A lot of focus on prayer, saving the soul. Hygiene was minimal. Daily hand washing might be it. Used herbal medicines from their gardens. Survival rates weren't great.
And the conditions for getting in sound, odd to us.
Patients often had to confess their sins, hand over all their possessions. If you recovered, you got them back. If you died, the hospital kept them.
Wow.
Yeah. And later, miniatures from the time show multiple patients crammed into single beds, overcrowded, basic.
So we've seen this incredible transformation from rural isolation to bustling, complex, but also dangerous medieval cities. Now let's fast forward a few centuries. Europe is on the cusp of another monumental shift, the Industrial Revolution. How did the economy evolve after the medieval period, sort of setting the stage for this new era?
Well, after the Middle Ages, say from around 1500 onwards, we see a gradual but really significant change. The economy began moving away from being dominated purely by the primary sector, farming, fishing, mining. Instead, the secondary sector, crafts, manufacturing, eventually factories, and the tertiary sector, trade, finance, services, started gaining much more prominence. More people were working as artisans in cities, and we saw the significant development of banking systems and much more sophisticated global trade networks. What's truly fascinating here, though, is the emergence of a genuine world economy. This was heavily driven by those European voyages of discovery and the establishment of vast colonial empires. These enabled the import of huge quantities of raw materials, think sugar, cotton, tobacco, gold, into Europe, where they were processed and traded. Cities like Antwerp, later Amsterdam, became these colossal centers of burgeoning global trade.
So new kinds of jobs emerged too.
Absolutely. New professions like accountants, insurance brokers, specialized merchants, they all rose to meet the complex demands of this expanding global system.
Okay, so the stage is set. Then, in the 18th and 19th centuries, something fundamentally changed the very fabric of society. Our sources call it a technological revolution. What were its main drivers? What really kicked it off?
Several crucial factors really converged around that time. First, you had another revolution in farming, agrarian revolution, mainly in the 18th century. New techniques, new tools, enclosure of land. It massively boosted food production again.
Which meant fewer people needed on the farms.
Precisely. It freed up a huge surplus of labor, who then migrated to the burgeoning towns and cities, becoming the workforce for the new industries. Second, Great Britain had this incredible, almost lucky abundance of key natural resources. Vast reserves of coal, right near the surface initially, and iron ore essential for building machines and powering factories. Plus, they had access to cheap cotton from their colonies, particularly in America and India. Third, and perhaps most obviously, technological inventions, things like the spinning jenny, the power loom. They drastically sped up textile production, and of course James Watt's significantly improved steam engine. That was a game changer. And finally, you can't ignore the economic and political context. The rise of capitalism played a vital role. Wealthy citizens, merchants, bankers, they invested heavily in factories, mines, and infrastructure like canals and railways. This was underpinned by the prevailing ideology of liberalism, free markets, private property, and minimal government interference. It essentially created a very fertile ground for industrial growth, for better or worse.
You mentioned the steam engine. Let's dive deeper there. Why was it so pivotal?
Right. Basically moving away from relying only on human power, animal power, or natural forces like wind and water.
The energy source changes.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And the stars of this show are really coal and steam. England had cut down most of its forests, so they desperately needed fuel. Coal demand soared.
And necessity is the mother of invention.
Right. Around 1710, Newcomen develops a better steam-powered pump for mines. And here's where Martin van Rossum's argument, which you find in some sources, offers a really surprising insight. He suggests that the primary impetus for the steam engine's invention wasn't just some general industrial need, but the specific acute need for powerful pumps in Britain's coal mines.
Because they were digging deeper and hitting water.
Exactly. Due to widespread deforestation much earlier, Britain desperately needed coal for fuel. But its mines were notoriously prone to flooding as they went deeper. So, Van Rossum argues, it wasn't that the Industrial Revolution led to the widespread use of fossil fuels. Rather, it was the existing intense demand for fossil fuels, specifically coal, and the technical challenges of extracting it that drove the invention of the steam engine. And that invention then unleashed the Industrial Revolution.
That really flips the common assumption on its head. The fuel demand came first.
Precisely. It suggests the reliance on fossil fuels was a cause, not just a consequence, of this massive shift. Then James Watt comes along in the 1780s and makes the steam engine much more efficient. Suddenly you have this powerful, reliable engine. His engine could provide continuous rotary motion, meaning it could power all sorts of industrial machinery, spinning machines, weaving looms, eventually trains and ships.
By the 1770s, steam engines were being used in iron production too.
Which allowed for things like
iron bridges. Huge new structures became possible. It was changing the physical landscape as well as the economy.
And within textiles, cotton became huge, right? Alongside wool.
Yeah, from around 1760 onwards, cotton had advantages. Cheaper, comfortable, easy to print on, and a massive supply coming from the American colonies, unfortunately reliant on enslaved labor.
Which meant more people could actually afford to follow fashion trends. For the first time, really, you see the first fashion magazines appearing. And because cotton wore out quicker than wool, it just fueled more demand. A cycle of production and consumption.
This industrialization totally reshaped British society, from agrarian to urban and industrial. What did that mean for ordinary people?
Oh, the shift was radical. We moved decisively away from home-based production where families might spin or weave in their cottages, and away from traditional handcrafted goods made in small workshops. Instead, production moved into large manufacturing and eventually fabricant factories. This led to the mechanization of labor on a massive scale.
So the very nature of work changed too.
Fundamentally, it shifted from often varied, skilled craftsmanship to more specialized, often repetitive tasks performed in sync with machines within a factory setting. It wasn't just about what was produced, but how it was produced, the rhythm and discipline of factory life. And this industrialization didn't stay confined to Britain for long. Belgium, as we mentioned, became the first country on the European mainland to really industrialize, thanks to figures like William Cockerell bringing British technology and Levin Bowen smuggling spinning mules. Belgium rapidly became one of the richest countries in the world during the 19th century because of it. Former farmers moved to the new industrial centers, textile towns, coal mining areas looking for work.
Was there an initial sense of opportunity, better wages?
Initially, maybe. Entrepreneurs made big profits, and for some workers, wages might have seemed higher than rural subsistence living. It fueled consumption.
But that didn't last, did it? The 19th century paints a much bleaker picture for the average worker.
Oh, absolutely. Conditions deteriorated badly. Workdays were incredibly long, 12, 14, even 16 hours, 6 days a week.
And the work itself?
Monotonous, repetitive, and incredibly dangerous. Factory accidents were common, and if you got injured, you were often just fired. No support.
Wages were low too, especially for women and children.
Shockingly low. Women earned far less than men. Children earned the least. And children were everywhere. Factories, mines, running messages. Small, agile, and cheap labor. It's horrifying to think about.
And zero social protection. No sick pay, no accident insurance, no pensions, no holidays.
It makes that medieval guild system almost look protective in comparison, doesn't it?
It really does. What about living conditions?
Dire. Cities grew so fast there was a massive housing shortage. Many workers lived in Baluch in these awful, cramped, unsanitary tenements built in back alleys.
No basic amenities.
Often no cellars, no proper toilets, no running water. A whole family, maybe 6 or more people, crammed into one room. Maybe one shared toilet or water pump for the whole alley.
The hygiene must have been terrible.
Typhus, cholera, tuberculosis spread like wildfire. Child mortality stayed incredibly high despite the progress.
So you had this stark contrast. Factory owners getting fabulously wealthy, while their workers lived in squalor, often right next door. The gap was right there, visible.
A completely different kind of inequality, baked into the urban landscape itself. But what's crucial to understand on a global scale is how this industrialization in Western countries dramatically widened the economic and military gap with the rest of the world. It made it much easier for these industrialized nations to dominate colonies and exert global influence.
And there's a longer-term environmental consequence too, right?
Absolutely. Looking at the long game, the massive increase in burning coal during this first industrial revolution is directly linked to the beginnings of global warming. It's a profound environmental legacy that started right back then. Okay, let's jump again. Early 20th century, USA, Henry Ford and the automobile. He introduces Fordism. What was the key idea?
Speed, cost, volume, build cars quickly, cheaply, and lots of them. His method was the game changer. The assembly line.
The moving line. Each worker does one small thing.
Exactly. Division of labor. You just install the same tire or tighten the same bolt over and over as the car moves past you. Much faster, much cheaper production. Not just cars, but radios, furniture, everything. It ushered in the era of mass consumption. More people buying the same standardized products.
And Ford had that famous idea about his own workers.
Right. He wanted his workers to be able to afford the cars they were building, so he raised their wages significantly. The $5 day.
A clever move, turning producers into consumers.
Exactly. It fueled advertising, fashion trends, the growth of department stores, supermarkets. It fundamentally linked mass production with mass consumption.
From medieval fields to guild cities, through the plague, then the explosion of industry, factories, global change, mass production.
Yeah, an amazing journey. And throughout, we've seen how progress brings huge changes, opportunities, but also seems to amplify inequality or create new forms of it.
Which brings us right back to that persistent question. Is inequality ever justified for the sake of progress? Philosophers have chewed on this for ages.
Let's start with Jeremy Bentham, the 18th century utilitarian. His idea was the greatest happiness for the greatest number. How would he view, say, those early factories?
Well, for Bentham, the calculation might be, okay, the conditions are bad for the workers, but the factory employs many people. The owner gets rich and invests more, overall wealth increases, so maybe the total happiness goes up, even if some individuals suffer greatly.
So, the ends could justify the means if the overall happiness sum increased.
Potentially, yes. His focus wasn't really on individual rights. It feels quite cold to us now.
How did John Stuart Mill, who came later but was also a utilitarian, refine that?
Mill added a crucial layer: individual freedom and development. He argued that inequality is not okay if it prevents someone from developing themselves, from flourishing. So you have to weigh inequality against the risk of oppression.
A more humanistic view. Then in the 20th century, John Rawls offers a really interesting thought experiment.
Right, Rawls says inequality is only justifiable if it works to the advantage of the least well-off members of society. His famous veil of ignorance idea.
Explain that.
Imagine you're designing a society, but you don't know what position you will occupy in it. Rich, poor, healthy, sick, talented, not so talented. Rawls argues you design a society that protects the most vulnerable, just in case that's you. It forces a kind of solidarity.
That's powerful. What about Michel Foucault? He had a much more critical take on progress.
Foucault saw inequality less as an economic outcome and more as a product of power structures, systems of knowledge and control, think schools, prisons, medicine. He argued that often progress is just a justification for expanding that control, for reinforcing power differences, often dressed up in scientific or moral language.
So progress itself could be a form of control.
For Foucault, yes, potentially. We need to be critical of who defines progress and who benefits.
Martha Nussbaum offers another approach, the capability approach. What's that about?
Nussbaum says we shouldn't just measure progress by wealth or GDP. We should look at people's actual capabilities, what they are genuinely able to do and be.
So if inequality limits those fundamental capabilities,
then it's unjust, regardless of overall economic growth. It's about human flourishing, real opportunities.
we can even look further back. Augustine, the early Christian thinker.
Augustine saw inequality largely as a result of sin. True equality was only in God's kingdom. Here on earth, the duty was charity, caring for the poor.
And Averroes, the 12th century Islamic philosopher.
He really emphasized reason and faith leading to a just society. Critically, he stressed education for everyone as a path towards equality. For him, any inequality that blocked access to education was fundamentally wrong. And someone like Hannah Arendt, writing in the 20th century, profoundly influenced by her experience as a refugee from Nazism, connected inequality directly to the health of the public sphere. For her, inequality becomes deeply dangerous when certain groups lose their political voice, their ability to act and appear in public life. That, she argued, fundamentally threatens democracy itself.
So many different ways to look at this relationship between progress and inequality. What stands out most to you from these contrasting ideas, especially looking back at the historical shifts we've discussed? It really feels like these debates from the past resonate so strongly today, doesn't it? As we grapple with technology, AI, wealth distribution, climate change, similar questions keep arising.
They absolutely do. What stands out, I think, is just how persistent this tension is. The journey we've traced from those medieval domain economies through the rise of cities, the industrial powerhouses, and now into our age of, well, digital transformation and maybe mass consumption 2.0. It clearly shows how deeply interconnected our past and present really are. We've witnessed again and again how innovation, new technologies, new ways of organizing society, how they can unlock immense potential, driving humanity forward in many ways, but also almost simultaneously, how they can create or exacerbate profound disparities.
So, as you, our listeners, think about this journey, maybe consider, in what ways do those mechanisms of inequality, the ones we saw in medieval cities or industrial factories, still operate today? How do they shape our lives, the choices we make about technology, economy, society? And that final thought, is progress really progress if it doesn't find a way to lift everyone up? We'll be back soon with more fascinating insights.
Wondering about the future, discovering the silence, truth, and bringing together the story of humans, from opinion to insight, and from source to story. We follow the traces through time and memory, echoing patterns from long ago. Keep exploring, building tomorrow. What drives war? What builds a wall? What makes a rise? What marks a fall? We turn the page, we search the frame to understand what still remains. From opinion to insight, and from source to story, we follow the traces through time and memory, echoing patterns from long ago. Keep exploring, building tomorrow.